Countertenor Anthony Roth Costanzo began performing professionally at the age of 11. He's appeared in operas, concerts, recitals, films, and on Broadway. He makes his Santa Fe opera debut as Dionysus in The Lord of Cries, and I'm happy to have him join me today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Great to see you, Brent.
This is a question that's on my mind. How does one become a countertenor?
Well, it's funny. It seems like this rarefied voice, but in fact, anyone could be a countertenor. Any man could be a countertenor. It's basically singing in falsetto voice. Of course, some voices are more adept than others in the falsetto register, but generally people don't become countertenors because when their voice changes, they start to sing as a man. And there's this concept of masculinity that is very tied to pitch. But growing up with two psychologist parents, I wasn't so worried about that when my voice changed, and I had sung as a voice soprano and I loved it. And I just kept singing high. Now, some countertenors will sing as a baritone or a tenor for a minute, and then they'll realize that they have this falsetto that they want to explore. So everyone arrives at it in a different way, and I find every countertenor voice, like a fine wine, to be somewhat different.
Now, you started working with the composer John Corigliano something like 6 years ago. How did he first approach you with this project, The Lord of Cries?
Well, funnily enough, John and I met 23 years ago when I was 16 years old. And I was called in as a very young countertenor to substitute in a big world premiere of his, where a boy soprano was supposed to sing this 20-minute piece. And the boy soprano's voice had changed. And so that's when I first met John and Mark, the librettist, Mark Adamo. And we became friends, and, I premiered his piece. And so when he was writing this opera, and I think writing this character of Dionysus and, the stranger and Dracula, all of these characters rolled into one, he was looking for this kind of otherworldly sound. And I think that's where the idea of a countertenor came. And he called me up and said, can we sing through some of this music that I've jotted down? And that's what I did starting about 6 years ago. And what he's told me is that ever since then, and even before then, he's written this role with my voice in his head, which is a great honor, of course, and a joy for me.
So then, as the project evolved and you sang and he wrote, did the music itself change? And how did it evolve?
Well, John is a real master composer. So I didn't even need to say to him, oh, I can't do this, or I can do that, or, this is my top note of this. He listened to my performances. I know he came to see Akhenaten at the Met, and, he wrote a piece that fits like a glove. It's like having a suit tailor-made for you, but without anyone even having to take the measurements. That's how much of a master that he is. And so the role evolved, I think, more in that he wanted to give me a kind of dramatic freedom. So at the end of Act 1, you hear these long, long phrases where a sort of invocation of my sisters and the sort of bacchanal to begin. And in the score, what you will see is, instead of a regular note with a rhythmic value, he'll write this long line. And I said, John, what is that? And he said, it means you sing it for however long you want to sing it. You be totally free so that you can express what you want. And so he writes these moments of total freedom for Dionysus in a way that is really unique to the character. And I feel that was something he did in a way to give me the kind of freedom that I would need to create a compelling portrayal.
So I guess the only thing I can think of to compare it to then would be like recitative in Baroque opera, where the accompanist is kind of catching up to you at the end. Is the conductor like looking for you to give him a hand signal or something when you think you're done? Or
It's not dissimilar from recitative or even accompanied recitative, but in this case, instead of being accompanied by a harpsichord, you do have the whole orchestra going. So what the conductor will do, and if you come see the opera, you might spot this, is he'll give numbers, like we're in the first part of this, and then it'll go to 2, and then it'll go to 3, and he'll be listening to what I'm singing and giving them numbers to tell them where we are in the sequence of chords that they play. So it may sound sound like, this intricate coordination. But in fact, the orchestra, the conductor, and I are all listening to each other and responding to each other.
As as Corigliano wrote the piece and as Adamo wrote the libretto, did they sort of stretch your limits as the limits of what you could do vocally?
Absolutely. This is a tour de force vocal role. And I think that's what makes it unique among the countertenor literature that exists and repertoire that exists. It has high extremes, the very top of a countertenor range, and also low extremes. And you go between those highs and lows all night. But it's not only the range of pitch, it's also the dynamic range. There are moments that are incredibly soft grained and pianissimo, and then there are big bombastic moments that approach Wagnerian heights. And that is something unusual for a countertenor, but I love it. I love singing with brass and timpani and all of this thick orchestration underneath, but also having the transparency in certain moments of a kind of intimacy.
And I know from talking to singers from romantic operas that a good composer will sort of allow you to warm up before, usually don't walk on stage and get the big aria. So is this composer Corigliano aware of that in a way you're sort of warming up as you go along so you get the really big stuff towards the end of each act?
Well, I like to warm up before I even step on the stage, usually. And in this case, the biggest and most bombastic moments do come at the end of the act. The first thing to occur in the opera, the first sort of aria, is extremely exposed. It approaches a cappella. So for me, I have to be so warmed up that you don't hear any tiny bit of grain or any tiny bit of things not functioning in a fully incorporated way. And the very beginning is, in that sense, the most exposed. And I think what that does is it connects us to the character and to the singer right away. It's a kind of prologue where I speak directly to the audience. So I like the intimacy of how exposed it is. But of course, it does mean that I have to walk on stage with my voice in pristine condition, and I can't really sort of ramp it up as if I were a Verdi soprano.
Not to knock Verdi sopranos. They've got their own burdens to bear, including dying at the end. Uh, your background first was in musical theater, if I'm right. So you're used to approaching a role as an actor and as a singer, but this role is so supernatural. I think there's even a possible interpretation of does it really exist other than in people's minds. So how do you ground yourself in a character like this? How do you approach it?
It's really interesting, this whole dialectic between what is real and what is artificial, and what is projected. But I think that this character is an interesting reflection of all the other characters' psychologies. So in a way, he exists to find the fault line in every other character's psychology. So the way that I enter into this is by understanding each of those other characters so well, and I feel sort of like Freud, and they're on my couch, and I, in each scene, am circling them and trying to find the way into them, find their weak point, and I think that I do have a sense of purpose. But that sense of purpose and my journey is not about myself, which is what you're saying. It's not about how I can achieve what I want. Rather, it's about showing people who they are, holding up a mirror, the way that art can often hold up a mirror to who we are. And the great themes of this piece, as I've gotten to know it more and more, are repressed desire and how we find a place for ourselves. Are we outsiders, and what does being an outsider mean? Or how do we feel, that we have a place somewhere in this world? And those are kind of timeless themes in the way that Greek tragedy and Greek drama in general can present us with timeless themes, and they're spun out through these very interesting dramatic dialogues in which I function more as the instigator than the recipient of the dramatic action.
No, that's interesting because from seeing it, you have such an intense focus, but it's really more like an empathetic focus on the others rather than trying to project whatever you think the character is. Until, of course, the end when boy does all hell break loose. Not to reveal the ending for anyone, but you can't expect it to be happy in this play.
Yes, it's true. And all hell does break loose, but it serves the purpose to show the character who sort of goes on this rampage, who he is and how repressed he's been, and to teach the moral and the lesson to everyone watching, including the people on stage and in the audience, of what this kind of self-repression can do.
Well, I would say coming away from this show, it is like nothing I had ever seen before, and such a realization of I I don't want it's deep, it's dark, it's really scary, it's icky in a way that's not off-putting. I think it really brilliantly realizes it musically, and we also have to give a shout out to the designers and the director because the play has such a mood and feel to it.
Absolutely. And James Dara, the director, and his whole team have done an incredible job, because when you read the story on paper, you might say, well, this is so convoluted. And it's the combination of Greek tragedy and also Bram Stoker's Dracula. I mean, this is wild. But in fact, when you see it play out in front of you, it's a quite simple, straightforward telling of a story. And I think that is a larger representation of what opera at its best can be. People are often so scared that they won't understand the words, that they won't understand the story or the music. It's too complicated. But in fact, when you get in there and you sit down and you watch it, it sort of takes you on a narrative journey. And when it's done well, and I think James Dara has done an amazing job, you don't even have to follow with the super titles. If you don't understand every word or you don't understand the language, you see it take place before you and you understand what's happening.
And since you mentioned it, it is sung in English with English and Spanish super titles. And I think what you say about the story then also goes back to Mark Adamo's libretto, which ties all this together in such a way. The two stories, you're right, you wouldn't think that they would seem to coincide, but it seems a total natural juxtaposition of the ancient story of Dionysus and the Victorian London story of Dracula.
Absolutely. And I really think you can't fully appreciate how well it works until you hear it and see it.
Tickets available both for the Opera House and for the simulcasts at santafeopera.org. My guest today has been Anthony Roth Costanzo, who plays Dionysus in The Lord of Cries at the Santa Fe Opera. Anthony, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Brent. It's been a pleasure.